Hello everyone, my name is El Parnaso, and in today's video I'm going to explain you why Culture Rotary sucks in hindsight. So don't forget to leave a like, to subscribe, and to share the channel with your people so we can grow. Because yes, I understand Culture Rotary sounds crazy, right? You don't only look at your opponent's hand, but you are adding something from your deck. So that each effect sounds crazy, even unfair, you will say, right? Especially when you even consider that Culture Rotary is finally a level 1 tuner monster in the development of the Kultun combo, which changes a lot of ways that you can approach the deck, right? However, you need to understand and make a revisionism of the history of this game to understand why this card sucks in the role that it was supposed to fulfill, following the patterns of how Yu-Gi-Oh works. And in order to do so, we need to understand the action of the card. What is the action of this card? Being an extender from the deck that was pushed for a deck that already existed as support to take the deck to the next level of top tier, right? Now, when you consider that pattern, you need to compare this card for the cards that did it in the last years of following this pattern. And in order to do so, you need to compare it first with 2020, with the beginning of 2024 in the form of Snake Eye Poplar. Now, yeah, Snake Eye Poplar can look at your opponent's hand, I know, but that is not the pattern that we are following in order to give support to a deck to becoming the top tier unfair bullshit on the meta, right? What we are following is this card being and the quality of the card as an extender. And then with that purpose in mind, you need to follow the idea of what is an extender demanding in current Yu-Gi-Oh to be the top tier unfair bullshit. Well, in today's times, following this pattern, you can see and conclude that the ideal extender to achieve that top tier needs to also be a starter. And not only that, the card needs to be a starter by itself, by either normal summon or a special summon in the card. Now, following that idea, you can see how Poplar fulfilled perfectly that situation, right? Because back in the day, you could add it with Bonfire or something like that, and just by a special summon it and trigger its effect on summon, you can make your full Snake Eye combo adding the Sinful Spoil banker, right? The blah blah blah. So when you consider that, you can see that Poplar can fulfill a purpose that Rotary is inefficient to fulfill. Because Rotary will never, ever work by itself. Yes, it can be an extender, but in order to be an extender, even then you need to show another card, which means that if you have Rotary and Rotary alone in your hand, this card don't do shit. If you have only Poplar and nothing else in your hand, you have full combo without having to sacrifice the idea of this being an extender in your deck. Because if your Snake Eye Ash got negated, you can activate Bonfire and add the Poplar and keep playing like nothing. So you can see how there are key differences in how this deck works, this card works in their decks, and how Poplar fulfill better purposes when it comes to actually play the game and the usefulness on the card by itself. But if Poplar were the only example, well, I wouldn't be making this video, right? In hindsight. So you need to consider how, even though Rotary and Poplar both were extenders that were added to a deck that already existed just months after the release of that deck, because Snake Eye Ash and the Sinful Spoils card were printed months before Poplar, just like Kultun Rotary was printed months after the original Kultun cards, right? Even though these are the same patterns, the Kultun Rotary don't fulfill the same purpose as well as the Poplar fulfilled it. Now, in order to see how this is the actual pattern in the top tier Yu-Gi-Oh decks when we talk about unfair bullshit, top tier, you can see how, oh shit, you can see how this pattern will not only repeat for the next top tier decks after Snake Eyes, but you can see also how, again, the Rotary sucks in hindsight when you compare it with all of those cards. So let's go all the way to the end of 2024 with Rizal and the Edge Rizal. In this case, we don't follow the pattern of being a card printed after, because in the case of Rizal, they gave all the extenders at once, so the deck can be fulfilled completely at the beginning. That doesn't mean that S Rizal is the extender for the deck or after their common normal summon of Ice Rizal, right? The same way that Poplar is the extender for the normal summon of Snake Eye Ash. However, you can also see how Edge Rizal, regardless of being an extender, is also a starter that works by itself and only by itself. Again, if you have Edge Rizal and only Edge Rizal in your hand, you have full combo Rizal. If you have Poplar and only Poplar in your hand, is full Snake Eye combo. If you have Kilton Rotary and only Kilton Rotary in your hand, you don't do shit. You don't do anything. Literally anything. Not even the look at hand effect, you know, because we can see another pattern that Kilton Rotary can fulfill as good as the pressure that Poplar and Edge Rizal pushes. Both of them, in order to trigger the resolution of development of their combo, all that they need is to be normal or a special summon. The Kilton Rotary not only needs to be successfully summoned in order to work, but then it needs to go to the graveyard as a synchro material. Those are just too many assumptions to a card that you are trying to make as good as unfair bullshittery in their bullshit, just like the cards that were printed before. You can see how Poplar can successfully achieve these fulfillments. You can see how Edge Rizal can fulfill those requirements. And you can see how both requirements Rotary can fulfill. It don't work by itself, and you need something else than successfully normal or special summon it, because its effect is not even on trigger. So now, let's go to 2025. And we go, obviously, with Yummy Marshmallow. Marshmallow, again, returned the pattern of being an extender that gets printed after the release of the main core of the deck, in this case being Yummy, and in order to push as an extension for the deck. And you can see how, again, Marshmallow also follows the pattern of working by itself, regardless of being also an extender to push your opponent if they negate your normal summon. Again, you see how this tradition is getting actually worked by intention by Konami. And you can also see how, regardless of this being an extender, if you have Marshmallow and only Marshmallow, this card will be full combo anyways. Both things that can be successfully achieved by Kilton Rotary. So you can see how Kilton Rotary is a complete failure when it comes to this high level of Yu-Gi-Oh! Top tier success that Konami was following during the last years. And to me, that makes the Kilton Rotary a very mid card when you consider what was the expectations and the purpose that it needed to fulfill in order to follow this pattern to make Kilton into the actual top next level. This is when you understand this and you can see how much of a failure Kilton Rotary is, you can understand why ever since Rotary got printed, another decks are achieving highly success too. Like, how many decks do you remember having success back in Snake Eye times? How many decks do you remember having success in Rizal times? You see my point? Even during the Yami format, how many decks did you see dominating that much as you can see right now in the diversified format that we have, when supposedly Kilton should be the unfair top successful deck? Like, we don't have that right now. And one of the reasons why we don't have that right now is because Rotary fails in order to fulfill the purpose that these cards did before it. And so this is what I'm trying to make you understand right now. Like, Kilton Rotary sounds like a crazy card, like, oh, you can look at your opponent's hand, bro, and then you can add something to keep playing. But at the end of the day, how many things needs to happen before you can achieve that actual unfair effect? A lot of things, right? Especially when you compare it with what you needed to happen for these three cards to push. And even then, this card will never, ever be a push by itself. Ever, under any circumstance, this card, just by having it and nothing else, will something that you will be glad with. It's something that you will get frustrated at, actually, because alone don't do shit. And this is very key to understand in order for you to lose the fear against Kilton matchups, because Kilton Rotary, as you can see in its purpose and in the hype that it needed to fulfill, sucks. I'm not sure if we can even add it to this holy trinity right here of successful decks, because it clearly don't fulfill the requirements. It gets it gets actually very underwhelming when you try to see this hindsight. So this is what I wanted to share with you for the purpose of today's video. Please stop fearing Kultung matchups. Kultung is a very mid deck when you consider the tradition behind the expectations that deck needed to fulfill. And you can see that results in how Kultung is not very dominating when it comes to compare it to how dominated was Snake Eye, for example, right? So if you enjoy it, again, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your people so Rotary keeps lowering on price like it should be. Bye bye.